listening to the Two Guys Talking Podcast Network. Those of you listening to this podcast have probably listened to the radio today, or this week, or in the last series of years that you've been alive. You know what, though? Even if you are a podcaster or you listen to podcasts, podcasting is just the new talk radio. Or is it? We're going to talk about that and a whole lot more that we'll need your insight on as we throw down, discuss, rise, and shine in podcasting. Greetings, everybody. I'm Mike Wilkerson, one of your hosts.
And I'm Bryan Entzminger, the other host.
Brian, this is one of the topics that I love to talk about with just about anybody, but especially people inside of radio. That it doesn't matter whom I meet, they're always ready and willing to say, you see, I knew podcasting would come around and just be the next talk radio. No. No, it's not. And it's such a great discussion because it instantly builds a series of warlike armies on both sides of the equation.
Oh, yeah.
With at least a couple of friends in the middle that are trying to go, hey, man, hold on a second. Let's talk about this.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And part of the challenge for me is for a long time, I used to explain to people when I was trying to explain what a podcast is, I would tell them it's basically like being able to take talk radio in your pocket on your phone and listen when you want, right? Because you're providing a schema, a way for people to understand something. However, there are, I think, some pretty marked differences between podcasting and radio, or at least the way podcasting can be implemented and some of the constraints of radio. Because you could make the case that fundamentally the only difference between podcasting and radio is the distribution method, because it's programming that you're putting out for people. But that distribution method means that there are also different constraints and different opportunities with each medium, right? That we don't have to do it a particular way. And radio, I think, was largely built to work a way because they had basically one funding model, and it was broadcast media that wasn't asynchronous. It was all at the same time. So they knew that they had to speak to a broadcast audience, where with podcasting, you have a global audience that can listen whenever they want. So it really changes what you can put together, I think.
Yeah, the concept of, quote, on-demand radio is also what I remember being in the mainstream of the front end of podcasting, trying to explain it to people that weren't in the know. What I always try to do is I try to make podcasting into a completely segmented storytelling element. Everyone has listened to somebody tell a story, and everyone remembers the stories that they like to remember and has then told someone else about them. And for me, podcasting is not only storytelling, but it's a captured perspective. It's literally someone's thought about insert topic that is then conveyed to somebody anywhere, whether it's on your phone, whether it's in your PC, whether it's wherever it is. And then you add on a whole bunch of other really cool elements that are inside of podcasting that just simply are not. Especially by default, inside of anything radio. The other thing that I try to do, and we're doing it inside of this program for at least a couple of times, is that I require for everything inside of my twoguystalking.com podcast network content to have at least one light bulb moment. And I got to tell you, I've listened to a lot of radio over the years. And I can tell you that it's hard for me to have a light bulb moment, especially on just kind of the yakety yak filling time in between music radio. It doesn't become a learning experience. It definitely doesn't entertain me. I guess maybe I just need to find different radio stations to listen to, but it doesn't do it for me, where I can go and pick what I want to listen to based on subject and the people that are inside of it, or a general content thread instantly inside of podcasting, where I can't do that inside of radio.
Yeah, and I think there are some let's go back to the distribution method. I think a lot of that is facilitated by the distribution method. So the cost for us to distribute this show to you as a listener is arguably pretty darn close to zero. It's not actually zero, but we don't have to hire an electrical engineer. We don't have to have a radio tower. We don't have to buy a frequency from the FCC. We're not limited to however far our licensed power grid will, like, none of that is a constraint. So, and we also don't have to keep a schedule of talent to keep the tower full, right? Because that's how you pay for the tower. So we can do things that in the traditional radio station, I'll call it traditional media, would not be commercially viable, right? There's no way that a show of our size talking about what we're talking about would ever make it onto a commercial radio station, because even if we were to go to, say, New York City or some other large city in the world, we would never gain enough listenership to make the cost of a tower work, much less with you being in Missouri, me being in Nashville, Tennessee area. Between the two, like, it's never going to happen, right? And so it gives us the opportunity to talk about things that people care about and not worry as much about the money part. Now, of course, we care about money. I don't think we're currently monetizing this show in any fashion, but we're not opposed to that. But we don't have to make the money back in the same way that we would if we've got $1 million a day radio station that, just to keep the staff on, we would have to make that much money. We don't have to do that, right? We've, I think, made zero from this, and I'm happy to keep doing it because it costs us our time, some editing, and I don't know, probably a few dollars a month for hosting. It's not much, right? It's a great thing. And because of that, we don't have to operate on a show clock. We don't have to sell 30% of our time on the hour as ads. We don't have to do the yakety yak yuck yuck between 4 songs or, news on the 5s or whatever it is that radio does. I don't even listen anymore. I get in the car and I actually just turn it off because I would rather listen to nothing than that. But that's my preference. But that I think is the cool part about podcasting, is it doesn't have to be any of that. It can be. If you want to do that, okay, you can. But I would say that looking at the direction that radio has gone in the last 15 years, I'm not sure I want to be on a train headed in that direction.
Right. There's another phenomenon, and before the program, Bryan and I always talk about what we want to talk about during these capture sessions. We typically capture more than one episode at once. And as we were spooling through, we kept glancing on several different things. And I think this is probably a good program, as good a program as any, to bring up many of the things that we were talking about.
Mm.
One of the other things that I think actually led us into this topic was this, is that the faster that radio and most of the people that manage the top ends of radio and radio nests try to make radio the same as podcasting, it instantly becomes not radio, but it's not podcasting either. And I think the other thing that we spilled on was the faster that radio tries to implement all of the especially analytical numbers-based things that are inside of radio, instantly glom onto podcasting, I think that is instantly detrimental to podcasting.
I would agree. There's a part of me, my day job, I'm an analyst. That's what I do. So there's a part of me that loves the numbers and the regression analysis and all of those kind of nerdy things that everybody hated in school. But there's also a part of that if you take that and you disconnect it from the humanity of the people you're connecting with, that you're talking to, it shifts it, right? It ruins it, because you end up chasing the numbers. You end up going after things that make sense on a spreadsheet, but you forget about that connection, that passion. And that, I think, is one of the gaps that podcasting tends to fill in my life is I like to have connections, but I'm not a large group kind of person. I like having these one-on-one conversations, a couple people at a time. I like doing interviews. I like having that kind of personal connection. And if I can get into the mind of my listener more than getting into the demographics and the stats, what I end up doing is putting together a show that captures that person's heart in a way that's different than if I was trying to make a show that will get me more listeners. It's not that I don't want more listeners. It's not that I've gotten sidetracked in the past and gone down the wrong path and had to come back and go, no, it's about the listeners I do have, not the listeners I'm trying to chase. And so I think there's always that tension, but I think if you have to err on one side as a host, a producer, a showrunner, if you have to err on one side, I would encourage you to err on the side of humanity, to that deep connection, the deep passion, the deep thing that people care about, way more than, well, 75% of our people like this particular candidate, so we're going to talk about them, right? That's just, I'll shut up because I don't want to get into politics anyway, but yeah.
Sure. Well, I think politics, again, not to talk about politics specifically, but politics is a very different road inside of a traditional podcasting vein than it is inside of the I will now yak for approximately 9.5 minutes until there's a minute and a half left before commercial, ask for phone calls, and then push to commercial.
Right.
And that's what I'm talking about. The fact that we are not on a clock, the fact that we, not currently, are beholden to any sponsors of any kind.
Right.
But just the fact that you and I can kind of pick a topic and we can dance around it as lightly or as thickly or as on the nose or as pointedly as humanly possible to entertain an audience specifically about that topic. Man, that's what got me about podcasting originally. It was great to start the way back in the day, quote, show that we had was called the Lunchtime Gab. And the Lunchtime Gab was a fellow coworker of mine and I talking about a variety of things inside the mainstream media news streams. And we would glance on those things and then, oh yeah, we talked about this show called 24. And so we talked about a lot of different things, but we'd always pick one thing that was going to be the juicy meat part that would be propelled inside of the title of whatever the episode was. Mm. And when we started only talking about 24 for an entire program, it was freeing. It instantly freed us to talk as much and as in-depth and as you quote, passionately about that program and all of the different nuances of it that we possibly could. Because we knew not only was it going to reach an audience that had any interest in it, it would then propel itself to find other people that it hadn't yet found.
Right.
And I love that the niche piece of what happens inside of podcasting is exactly why I developed the Two Guys Talking Podcast Network, because what I did was I took the 24 podcasts, which was where everybody was going in to dive in and grab a taste of delicious 24 based ice cream. And then while they were there, I started surrounding myself with other different coutured ice cream flavors that they could also jump into and grab a snippet of and then become a listener inside of those, and so on and so
right.
on and so on. And that's why I think podcasting is completely different and will always be completely different than what happens inside of modern day, especially talk radio.
Yeah. I mean, as I'm thinking about this, the things that we haven't done on this show so far.
Talk about politics?
Well, we haven't done that.
Showcase long form songs to get us sued? Nope.
No, we haven't done that. We also didn't talk about the dream that I had the other night, or this interesting article that I read about a topic nobody cares about, or what the weather was yesterday. It's not that we don't care about those things. Actually, Mike and I do talk about that, but that's what the green room is for. Because when we're delivering this, we can allow our personalities come out in the perspective that we have and the way we share it. We don't have to overshare from our lives or make stuff up to make ourselves seem like a bigger personality. We don't even have to have cool names. I'm Bryan Entzminger, the uncoolest name you could possibly have to be the host of something, but I'm here, right?
Oh, I don't know. I was thinking about, changing my name to that so we could maybe they'll think we're brothers or something. That'd be cool.
Nice.
In any case, the bottom line is this, and the reason that the front end and title of this episode was so pointed and interest-catching is because we want to know what you guys think about all this that we're talking about here. The way you're going to do that is the same way as usual. You're going to go on over to our website over at podcastgauntlet.com. You're going to fill out the quick web form. You're going to tell us what you think. Remember also, if you happen to be watching over on the YouTubes or on the internets, you can also use all of the commentary stuff down here at the bottom if you see it. Click in there, put in some comments. And remember, we're always collecting insight from our listeners so that you too can be featured in a future all fan input episode of the Podcast Gauntlet. Until then, I'm Mike Wilkerson, one of your hosts.
And I'm Bryan Entzminger, pushing to commercial and waiting for you to call in, the other one of your hosts.
Continue to throw down, to discuss, to rise and shine in podcasting. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.